and conversation Zoom format. We're really excited for kicking off the very first one and having such a large group joining us today. It is so exciting. And it's really exciting to kick it off with our special guest, Tim Speed. Tim will be, there he is, he's waving at you all. And in case you can't tell which one is Tim, he's the one with the huge airplane behind him. So Tim will be sharing some information about the history of the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum, as well as some of the exhibits. And if Tim does look familiar, it could be because he has also been a guest when we've had our in-person coffee talks. And he's also a member at the Colburn Center and a volunteer at our center. So we're really excited to have him today. So
yeah, it's nice to join you.
Good.
It's David who told me about it.
Yeah, I'm glad you're able to join us, Tim.
Oh, thank you.
So before I go ahead, I'm just going to give you a little background information about Tim. So Tim here is, I'm just going to read this little bio. So Tim comes by his interest in aviation honestly, despite the fact that he is not a pilot and has no military experience. His father was a navigator in World War II, flying special operations in a Handley Page Halifax. Tim first became involved with aviation as an Air Scout while still wearing short pants. I'm assuming that means like shorts. He obtained a business degree in the United Kingdom and joined British Overseas Airways Corporation after graduating from university. He served as a station operations officer in Dubai, Tokyo, and Beirut. He immigrated to Canada with his family in 1980. Before retiring, he was the CEO of a large air freight and logistics company. He has been a volunteer tour guide, speaker, and educator at the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum since retiring in late 2010. So welcome, Tim, and the platform is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. So let's see if we can make this work. Okay, is everybody seeing that?
Yes.
Yeah, you can see that, so I assume everybody else is seeing it. Well, thank you very much indeed for giving me this opportunity to speak to you, and thank you for showing up on this snowy Tuesday. This little presentation, yes, as Nicole said, is about the history of the museum and some of our exhibits. It is an unashamed promo. You don't get the real benefit of the museum without actually going there. So what I'm hoping to do is to whet your appetites. And for all those people out in Niagara, Hamilton Airport's really not that far away from you, and we'd love to see you there too. So Canada's largest flying museum. The beginnings, we go back to 1970. Four Hamilton businessmen, primarily Dennis Bradley and Alan Ness, decided they wanted to fly a high performance aeroplane. So they bought themselves a Fairey Firefly, which is a Royal Canadian Navy carrier-based aeroplane in the days when the Royal Canadian Navy actually had aircraft carriers. Now, regrettably, the aeroplane and Alan Ness were lost in an accident during the CNE Air Show in 1976. The museum has since replaced the aeroplane from one that used to operate in Australia, and it is the aeroplane which is on our logo, being one of the primary aeroplanes that arrived. Now, once they had actually started the collection, a lot of other people who had aeroplanes of the right vintage brought their aeroplanes along. And so we have a number of what we call our Yellowbirds. Now, these aeroplanes are all trainers, and they were involved in the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan during World War II. In Canada, there were 80 flying schools. They trained 138,000 airmen, pilots, gunners, navigators, engineers, and bomb aimers. and 75,000 ground crews. Huge contribution. The schools were built all over Canada, and Hamilton Airport was one of the first schools. Now, by 1973, the organization had become a registered charity. We had a volunteer organization, and we acquired our first multi-engine aeroplane, Hot Gen, B-25 bomber, which celebrated its arrival at the airport by dropping melons down the runway in a bombing run, which did not endear us to the local air traffic control people. And it was also in 1975 that we had the first air show. The purpose of the museum was to restore aeroplanes to flight. And this is an early example of the kind of condition that some of our exhibits arrived with the museum. So 1975 to 2009, it took us to actually restore the Lysander to flight. And you see some other examples of the way aeroplanes arrived with us. Further acquisitions were a DC-3. This is one of the highest hourred aeroplanes of its type in the world. It has been in the air the equivalent of 11 years. The Avro Anson was the kind of aeroplane that was used at the Hamilton Airport when it was a flying school. And the Beechcraft Expediter is an unusual aeroplane. It was in continuous production from 1937 to 1973 as a small transport aeroplane. Our most famous acquisition, of course, is our Lancaster. Now, this is how it looked in 1977 on stanchions outside the Royal Canadian Legion in Goderich. It was acquired by a Goderich businessman who acquired it in exchange for setting up a scholarship fund for the children of Legionnaires. He then donated it to the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum, and in the 1977-78, we started dismantling it for transportation back to Hamilton. We recruited the Royal Canadian Air Force to do a, quote, exercise, your tax dollars at work, to lift the aeroplane from its site in Goderich to bring it back to Hamilton. And that's a whole adventure in itself, a whole different story. The aeroplane, after 10 years of restoration, first flew again in September 1988. It has flown every year since 1988, round about 50 hours. It is painted in the colours of an aeroplane operated by the Royal Canadian Air Force during World War II, based in the United Kingdom, and in memorial of Andrew Minarski, an air gunner who gave his life trying to help his friend during a raid in the latter part of World War II. The museum was badly affected by a fire in February 1993, excuse me. The museum at the time was housed in two old World War II hangars on the west side of the airport, which the source of the fire has never been established. A lot of damage was done. Fortunately, the Lancaster was saved by volunteers who managed to get the landing gear back on the aeroplane and get it pushed out of the hangar before the flames engulfed it. But we did lose 5 aeroplanes, 5 airworthy aeroplanes, a Spitfire, a Hurricane, an Avenger, a Stinson, and an Oster. The museum was open again within 3 days, and planning began for a replacement building, which was construction commenced in 1994, and it was completed in 1996. You can see that from a plan view, it mimics a delta wing aeroplane. And Prince Charles, who is a patron of the museum, opened the museum, formally opened the new museum in 1996. And this is a museum interior as it is today. Very crowded, as you can see, and we are hoping to be able to expand to accommodate the exhibits that have been added to the museum since 1996. Now, this is how we very often find our exhibits. A lot of aeroplanes were just abandoned at the end of World War II. They had become obsolete because of the development of the jet engine. the war was over, the airmen wanted to go home, and the aeroplanes were just given or sold to farmers who used their fuel in their tanks for their equipment and who used the fuselages, I don't know, to keep chickens or whatever. Now this aeroplane, the Bolingbroke, there were parts of 8 airframes in this Bolingbroke. Unfortunately, we are not going to be able to fly it. There have been significant problems with the engines, Bristol Mercury engines, and also with the structure of the wings. But it will be restored to a complete aeroplane, and it will be a static display. It may even move under its own power, but it will not be airworthy. Other aeroplanes that we have acquired, another Yellowbird, the Cornell trainer, again from the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan, and the Canso, an amphibious aeroplane used extensively by many air forces during World War II. This was the aeroplane that located the German battleship Bismarck in the Atlantic, and also located the Japanese carrier fleet on their way to Midway. Flown by Canadians, it was a submarine hunter. And this aeroplane is painted in the colors of a sub-hunter flown by 8 Canadians, 3 of whom died after the aeroplane was shot down over the North Atlantic after successfully sinking a German U-boat. And the captain, David Hornell, was awarded the Victoria Cross, as he did not survive in that incident. Boeing Steerman is an aeroplane that was used extensively in flight training during World War II, not very much in Canada. You'll notice that it has an open cockpit. It's cold enough when you go up without coping with a Canadian winter. They had considered trying to fit it with cabin heat and with a canopy, but it didn't work, and so they had to replace it actually with the Cornells. The Grumman Tracker is another carrier-borne aeroplane. You can see that the wings are folded, and this was a Cold War sub-hunter operating off carriers like the Bonaventure. The Crane, Cessna Crane, worked both as a training to train pilots to handle multi-engined aeroplanes, but also as a flying classroom. So navigators, wireless operators, and bomb aimers would be trained whilst this aeroplane was being operated. And the Fleet Fort is an aeroplane that was built by the Fleet Aircraft Company based in Fort Erie. Another one for you folks out in Niagara Falls, just a neighbor of yours. Fleet Aerospace still exists. They do not build aeroplanes anymore, but they build components, sophisticated components for aerospace products. We have one aeroplane which we can't actually get into the hangar at all. You see the tail on this de Havilland Canada Buffalo, built in Downsview, this aeroplane. And it's painted in the colors of the United Nations in commemoration of 9 Canadians shot down over Syria while on a peacekeeping mission in 1974. And this is an aeroplane that under happier times you can actually get into and see the inside of the plane. We also have a number of Cold War jets. Now, the jets are not operational. We do not fly our jets, because frequently when we are given these aeroplanes when they're retired by the Royal Canadian Air Force, they keep the engines because the engines can be used in other aeroplanes. And to buy a jet engine is more expensive than to buy the airframe. And also we do not have the expertise in our staff and volunteer teams to actually manage jet aeroplanes. But the 104, the top right picture in the tiger colors, not bumblebees, tigers. And it is the fastest aeroplane that the Royal Canadian Air Force has ever flown. It is even faster than the current generation of jet fighters that the Canadian Air Force have. It will do 2.5 times the speed of sound at 35,000 feet.
Wow.
The CF-101 Voodoo This is the aeroplane that we purchased from the United States after the Avro Arrow had been cancelled. Again, a long-range interceptor designed to operate during the Cold War to intercept and discourage any Soviet incursions into Canadian Arctic airspace. Similar job for the Canadair CF-5, the Freedom Fighter. Became a film star, did this aeroplane, not this particular one, but one like it. If you remember Top Gun, and you remember at the end, he's fighting off the MiGs. Well, there weren't any MiGs available for the producers, so they painted some of these CF-5s black and pretended they were MiGs. The CF-100, the Canuck, built in the same factory that built the Lancaster, built our Lancaster at Pearson, what is now Pearson Airport, Malton as it was called. This is the world's first all-weather jet fighter, and it is 100% Canadian. It was in operation because of the cancellation of the Avro Arrow. It stayed in operation until 1981. The Tutor is best known as the aeroplane that is flown by the Snowbirds. And this aeroplane was a trainer. The Snowbirds are the only people who continue to operate the Tutor. The last time it was used in Canadian Air Force service, other than the Snowbirds, was 2000. And the aeroplane at the bottom, the de Havilland Vampire, this is a very, very, very early jet fighter, actually operational in 1945, not quite in time to participate in World War II, but towards the end of that year. The Sabre, the F-86, is a Korean War vintage aeroplane. This one is built in Canada, and many of these aeroplanes were like the 104 Starfighter, like the F-5, were American designs built in Canada by Canadair. This particular F-86, the Canadian version was actually preferred by some of the export markets that bought the F-86. Now we talk about it being an American design, but in fact it was a German design. The Germans were the first people to discover that in order to make aeroplanes go supersonically, you had to have swept back wings. The engineers who discovered this were liberated by the Americans and then continued to work on aeroplanes of this kind under American tuition. So of course, some of them ended up in the Soviet Union. So you'll find a lot of similarities, a lot of similarities between the early F-86 and some of the early MiG-15s and 17s. The Yale is another trainer. It has an interesting story. It's if I can't flick back to the earlier slide, but it's it looks very much like the Harvard. But in fact, it was built for the French Air Force. But the problem was that by the time the aeroplane was complete, when the order was complete and they were going to be shipped, there was no longer a French Air Force, at least not one that was on our side. So they kept them here and used them as trainers. But we are much more than a collection of aeroplanes. The issue is that restoring and my piece of paper here for a second. Restoring and flying vintage military aircraft is very expensive. And so we have to adopt a number of different methods in order to generate revenues, which allows us to fulfill our primary mission. So you can get married in the museum. We have corporate events, lots of trade shows, and museum-specific events, like Air Force Day. This is an opportunity to see your tax dollars at work. Usually takes place on the first weekend of June. And you can see we have some pretty special visitors come in. So there's a C-17 Globemaster. We have a couple of C-130s. That's my grandson sitting at the controls of a C-130. and my two grandchildren actually in the backside of the C-130, just to show us how big it is. People are allowed to go onto some of the aeroplanes, and you can actually talk to fighter pilots who have come to see us, as well as our own aeroplanes being flying as well. We are well known for our Remembrance Day service. It is the largest indoor Remembrance Day service in Canada, and it is available worldwide through the wonders of the internet and CHCH TV. Many of you will be aware that we actually flew our Lancaster to the UK in 2014. We wanted to be able to people to actually see the only two remaining airworthy Lancasters together. They hadn't been seen for 50 years prior to 2014. And it was an opportunity to do this whilst there were still some veterans who had served on Lancasters still alive, because they were disappearing as they were getting older and older. And so this was a very remunerative activity for the museum, but obviously pretty high risk as well. It cleared all the museum's debts. Bottom right is we actually had a trailer on site selling memorabilia, which was highly successful. And this aeroplane, our aeroplane, is of the two Lancasters flying together there. Our aeroplane is the one at the back. The one at the front is operated by the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight, the Royal Air Force. The latest news on our planes is that the CF-104, the gate guard, which has been down for 2 years because it was corroding quite badly, so it's been repainted and is back now in place. The Grumman Avenger, replacement for the one that was lost in the fire, went through a total renovation and is now airworthy. We're just waiting for Transport Canada to sign off the paperwork. The Fairy Firefly has had major work done, particularly at the wing roots. Again, it has a carrier-based plane, it has folding wings. There's a lot of wear and tear takes place at the attachments that has to be replaced. And the Canso, we fly our aeroplanes with passengers. And the only way into the Canso at the moment, initially, was through these little bubbles right at the back of the aeroplane. Transport Canada were not happy with that, so we had to fit a door. So we had to cut a lump out of the side of the aeroplane and fit a door so that we could get a license to fly with people on board. The bottom is the C-47. Now, this was an operational aeroplane. It was flown by Environment Canada right up till 2014. On the right is how it looks now. It's painted back into its wartime colors. This aeroplane actually operated on June the 6th, 1944, during the landings in Normandy. And you can ride on it. Educational services is a source of large numbers of people young people coming to the museum, both at the preschool, kindergarten, various grades up to grade 10. More than 20,000 a year. Of course, we haven't seen any at all for over 12 months, which is very, very sad. We also have night ops, a sleepover experience for youth organizations, and normally summer camps during the summer. The grade 6 program, Properties of Air and Characteristics of Flight, fits in with the science curriculum, where flight is a component for grade 6. And this is an example of a simulation of the Battle of Britain operations room, how the British Royal Air Force managed the battle against the Luftwaffe. And we use this, and grade 10 students actually get to operate this as if they were in an operations room at that time. So what else do we have? Well, there are artifacts and display areas. We have dioramas of the Dambusters raid. We have a real size version of replica of the Dambusters bomb. When you actually see this thing, I should have somebody standing next to that. You have no idea just how big it is. Some people think it looks like an oil drum, but it's a bigger oil drum than you've ever seen in your life. and it was carried underneath Lancasters, spinning at 500 RPM, weighing 9,250 pounds.
Wow.
We have the Air Combat Zone, where you can fly a CF-18 simulator. Currently, we were, and up until the latest lockdown, we had a VR exhibit of the Anne Frank house. 1919, we had the Berlin Blitz. You could actually do a VR experience being inside a Lancaster on a raid. And we have a Health in Space exhibit. There is, of course, a gift shop. We are a museum. Like any museum in the world, you cannot leave until you have actually passed through the retail establishment. Then we have a very interactive set of exhibits. This is a Boeing 727 nose and the cockpit. You can actually get into the cockpit and see it. The rest of the aeroplane is not behind that wall. We don't have the rest of the aeroplane. I think it was all made into beer cans. But you can actually get in, as my grandchildren are doing. You can actually get into the tutor. You can get into the CF-100. Regrettably, this is all we have of the Avro Arrow, just a model. There are about 350 or more volunteers that make the museum work. The business model is basically would not work at all without the volunteers. So if you are interested in aviation, you don't have to have a background. You'll be taught everything you need to know. Come and help us. Come join us. It's a lot of fun, and it's a great opportunity to spend time with other seniors of similar interest, because most of the volunteers are seniors. And come fly with us. Become a member. You can fly on any of our aeroplanes, starting at about $120 and going up to $3,600 for the Lancaster. Anyway, thank you all again for being with us today, and any questions?
Thank you very much, Tim. Okay, so I do see one in the chat box here for you, Tim. So your first question is an amphibian limited to water?
So it can take off from a regular concrete runway, then retract its gear and land on water. Take off from the water, come back, drop the landing gear and land back on a regular runway.
Okay, thank you for that. So if you do have a question, I can't see everyone on my screen, so I won't be able to see if if someone's lifting up their hand, but perhaps Julie, you can help me with that. And I will read more questions that have come up in our chat. So this question is from Lisa. Did you say the general public can go for a flight?
Yes, it is necessary for you to become a member of the museum. A membership for a senior, I think, is about $110 a year, which gives you, in addition to the opportunity to upgrade your membership to fly on our aeroplanes, it means you can come to the museum anytime you want. You never have to pay an admission again. So it really is pretty good value. And because we're always doing something new, there are new exhibits, there are new activities, there are new events, that we're always trying to do something new at the museum so that people will come back.
Okay, thank you. Yes. Just to add to that, Tim, I know perhaps there are some in the audience as well who have purchased memberships in the past, but I know I did purchase one for my husband once, and he did go up for a flight in one of the planes. He was very scared, but he really enjoyed it. He really enjoyed it. Okay, our next question comes from John. Does the Vampire jet have an engine?
We actually have, yes, right next to it, in fact, is a de Havilland Goblin engine that was one of the engines that was used in the Vampire. It also was flown with a Rolls-Royce Nene engine, and we have a cutaway version of the Nene as well. These are very, very early jet engines. They were based on the Frank Whittle design. Frank Whittle was designing jet engines back into the 30s. And they use a different kind of compressor format. I'm not going to get technical with this. They use a different format to the current jet engines, but nevertheless, they're very interesting exhibits to see. And you can see just how a jet engine works.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I can see the questions. I've got my chat open.
Oh, okay, okay. Do you want it? Sure, go ahead.
It says there are just the 2 operational Lancasters today. There are about, out of 7,300 Lancasters that were built, 400.
Tim, we keep losing your volume. We lost you after 400. I'm not sure why.
I'll slow down a bit.
There you go.
It's probably the snow and the internet speed up here. 430 were built in Canada. The balance of the 7,300 were built in the United Kingdom. There are about 17 complete airframes around the world, but only 2 of them are operational. Ours and the one in the United Kingdom that I mentioned, the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight. The aeroplane that used to be down at Ontario Place, which was owned by the city of Toronto, they have shipped to Victoria, British Columbia, where somebody has the ambition that they're going to restore it to flight. I wish them luck and an awful lot of money.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm just checking the screen to see if I see any hands raised as well. If you're not able to use the chat box, if you're having trouble, you can raise your hand, and perhaps Julie, you can help me too if you see any hands raised. If someone has a question, I'm just going to scan some of the, because I can only see, there's a lot of people and I can only see 6 at a time. So.
Nicole, we just had a question from Sue. Tim, is there any manufacturing in Canada?
Yes. Bombardier is you probably heard of Bombardier. For a time, they were actually making quite a lot of aeroplanes, but they have gradually sold off all their aircraft manufacturing. It was a bridge too far, and they were badly managed. They've sold their commercial aeroplanes, what was to you and me as taxpayers became known as the C series. They've sold that for $1 to Airbus. They have sold the regional jet division to Mitsubishi in Japan, who were a major contractor for them. They have sold the Q400, the turboprop commuter airline. I'm not quite sure who bought that. And Viking Aircraft, I think, a company based out in BC, but they are still manufacturing some in Downsview. And Bombardier are now limiting themselves to business jets. Now,
Okay.
Tim, could I ask you to tell, I'm not sure if I have the details right, but you told a story about when you were working for an airline and there was a, was it hostage or terrorist or some sort of dramatic event? I love that story. Would you share that with all of our listeners?
Yes, I can. It was the summer of 1970. Sorry, fall of 1970. It was September 1970. And 3 airplanes were hijacked. I was working for British Overseas Airways, or BOAC at the time. They hijacked my VC-10. They hijacked a Swissair DC-8 and a TWA 707. And they took them all to an old World War II sand strip in the middle of the desert in Jordan. Was known as Dawson's Field. The terrorists renamed it Liberation Airport. And they did eventually release many of the hostages. But in fact, it was King Hussein who sent his soldiers into the refugee camps that they had established in Amman, that actually got the rest of the passengers out. I was supposed to go down to this airfield and find a way of bringing the aeroplane out. Because at that time we expected them to just release the aeroplane, exchange it for hostages. They released the British hostages in exchange for a terrorist called Laila Khaled, who had been arrested and was in jail in England for an earlier hijacking attempt in that, because this was like peak hijacking season, was 1970. Anyway, I was supposed to go down to the desert. I actually had my bag packed and a car arranged, or a Jeep arranged, to go down there to work out how long the runway was, and to get rid of all the excess weight on the aeroplane, like seats and toilets and galleys and things, and then bring the aeroplane out. But the terrorists blew the aeroplane up before I went down there, and not with the passengers on board. I think I know the crew got out. I don't know if there were any fatalities at all, but we did get most of the people out.
Okay.
And I think they got free travel for life.
Did they really, Tim? Was that true?
I don't know. I don't know.
Oh, that's quite an.
Get many of them near an airplane again.
Okay, thanks for sharing that. I think I saw Colin. Colin, did you have a question? I think I saw your hand up.
Yes, I did. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, I can.
Okay. So, Tim, Mark and I were in a museum in Trenton a few years ago, and they seem to be renovating a Halifax.
Yes.
Do you know anything about that?
I do. The Halifax was a Royal Canadian Air Force Halifax. It was flying on an operation to support the partisans in Norway. It wasn't a bombing mission. In fact, it didn't have a bomb bay. It had a hole in the floor, and it was used as basically a cargo airplane to carry supplies. They got off course and they got too near to a German anti-aircraft site, and they were brought down on a lake. The only survivor was the rear gunner, and the other crew had eventually ended up in the water, in the icy water of this Norwegian lake, and all perished. He survived because he managed to get on top of an overturned life raft. When they had finished the restoration in Trenton, they had a dinner and he was still alive, and they invited him to the dinner. And they served his coffee in his thermos flask, which they had recovered from the rear turret of the aeroplane when it was dragged up from the bottom of the lake. And that's why it came back to Canada, because it was actually a Royal Canadian Air Force aeroplane that had been involved in that. It will never, it's not airworthy, it's not intended to be airworthy. There was too little of it left. And the museum you're talking about is the Royal Canadian Air Force Museum in Trenton. Their mandate.
Sorry, Tim, you're cutting out again. Can you hear me, Tim, at all? Or sorry, you were cutting out again.
I think it's your bandwidth, Tim. It's saying you have limited internet bandwidth.
Yes, I know.
You're back. You're back.
Yes, it says it's telling me here my internet connection is unstable, but this is Kojiko. Just so you know.
Thank you.
So I say, yeah, so it's the Royal Canadian Air Force Museum in Trenton, and the intention is that it will not be restored to flight. That's not what they do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I've seen another question come up on the chat from Grant Foster.
Yes.
Were the Avro arrows recently recovered from Lake Ontario models or actual aircraft? No, they were definitely models. They were trying to experiment. They had the Avro arrow was absolutely cutting edge. and they were trying to experiment with what wing format would allow them to operate at twice the speed of sound. And so they created these models with different types of wing formats and launched them on rockets over the lake with telemetry to feed back to the ground. And it's these models that they have found in Lake Ontario. Regrettably, there are definitely no, even despite the CBC's mini-series, ignore it, there are no Avro arrows anywhere. I think there is the nose of one in one of the museums in Ottawa.
Interesting. Okay, thank you for that, Tim. And I think we had a hand up from Linda, Linda's iPad. Linda, did you have a question?
It's Lynn and Paul.
It's Lynn and Paul.
Oh, Lynn and Paul. Okay, sorry. Hi, Lynn and Paul.
We are members of the Warplane Heritage Museum.
Yeah.
And we have been on a flight. We're up in the DC-3. Lynn's not crazy over flying, but once she got airborne in that, you couldn't hold her down. She was up and down into the cockpit and asking questions and everything. Thought it was really great because we were so low, you know, down, rather than the only experience she'd had. It was, you know, obviously in a commercial jetliner flying high up in the air where you can't open windows.
No, the windows were open. I was so worried about it.
Well, thank you for being a member, and thank you for taking a flight. It really is. It's a very different experience because you're around about 2,000 feet up.
Yeah, I recommend it to anybody.
I've flown the DC-3 a couple of times with the summer camps as an escort for some of the campers. We normally fly all the way along the lakeshore, around the CN Tower and back again. And it was spectacular because you could actually look out the window and you can see the Colborne Centre.
Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't fly this way. We flew over the Niagara area.
Okay.
Yeah, and also I've seen film of that explosion blowing up the terrorists blowing up the plane. What was it?
A VC-10.
VC-10.
Yeah, I have that. I have that. I have some still pictures, and
yeah, it's quite spectacular.
Picture,
to say the least.
It's available on the internet if you're particularly ghoulish.
Yeah.
But yes, very sad to. It was a very challenging time.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you for that. We have another question, Tim. This one comes from Tim, another Tim. What happened to the Avro replica that was at Downsview?
As far as I know, it is in crates in a warehouse somewhere near Pearson Airport. The museum that it was at Downsview, they got into financial difficulties and basically were evicted by their landlord who wanted to develop the land. And I'm not sure what happened to all their exhibits. For a time, it was the International Centre on Airport Road. And it's a big aeroplane. It takes up a lot of space. Certainly, currently, even if we wanted to, we couldn't find a home for it, I don't think. But it is a life-size replica, and as far as I know, it is in pieces. It's not exhibited anywhere that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you for that. And I think we also had a hand up by Brian Parson. Brian, there you go. You can just unmute yourself, and then you can ask Tim your question. If you hover over the microphone, or you should be able to unmute.
There we go. Got it. Okay. Pat and I, my wife and I, were able to go to Downsview to see the replica of the Avro Arrow. It was closed, but the guy came. The guy came to the door, saw us, and he gave us a personal tour of the planes and the Avro Arrow. It was great. It was just totally memorable to see that. And also, I've always had a bit of, it's just that it's too bad the Avro Arrow was such a great plane built by the Canadians, and they were pressured to scrap it because the Americans didn't know that from what I gathered, didn't know that we had built this plane, and it was just such a great plane. And from what I gather is that after it was all scrapped and everything, that we made an agreement that we would never do that again, to build a plane like that without them knowing about it.
There were a lot of stories about the Arrow, and all I can say is that I'll come back again and I'll talk about the Avro Arrow.
It's gone again.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Lost you, Tim.
Hopefully he heard everything I asked. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, the last, Tim, I'm not sure if you can hear me, but we've lost your, we can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes. Now
Yes?
we can.
Yeah, I'm back again.
I think what we last heard was that you said you would come back and perhaps do another presentation strictly on the Avro Arrow.
Yes, I will do that.
Okay, perfect. Good stuff.
That would be good. That'd be great.
Good. Now we also have someone else I think raised their hand. I don't think there's a name. I think it just said iPad. Was there someone else that has a question that had raised their hand?
I think that's me. That's me, I think, Colin Dawson.
Okay, go ahead, Colin.
You can hear me all right. Can you hear me, Tim?
I can.
Tim, I was in Calgary 2 or 3 years ago, and my son took me a drive about an hour's drive, and he took me to a small town there. I can't remember the name of the town. But
Nanton.
there was a fully built Lancaster bomber there, and it wasn't airworthy, they told me, but while I was there, they actually ran all the engines. They actually ran the engines. Now, they were trying to make it airworthy. Do you know if they ever succeeded?
They haven't succeeded as yet, and I believe they have given up. It's called Nanton.
That's it.
It's
yeah.
town, and it's the Royal Canadian Air Force Bomber Command Museum.
Yes.
And yes, they do have an aeroplane, and it's a memorial to a young Albertan boy who lost his life in a Lancaster operation during World War II. But I believe that they have discovered that the cost and the resources required to get an aeroplane certified for airworthy are beyond their resources.
Didn't they lend you an engine at one point for the flight over to Britain?
No, the engine that blew up in England whilst we were over there, the Royal Air Force lent us an engine.
Oh, did they? Okay.
And
they also had the undercarriage, fully operational undercarriage, which you could see in operation in that museum. It's very interesting. Yeah.
I have seen that, and they also have, and I don't know if it's a YouTube video or not, but it may well be. They have a working, albeit not the guns, but they have a working rear turret.
Right.
And you can watch a man climb into the rear turret and rotate it and elevate the guns and drop the guns, and they have little light bulbs in the barrels, so they look as though it's firing.
Right. And that's Nanton, is it?
That's Nanton, Nanton.
That's right. Thank you.
It's about 45 minutes to an hour south of Calgary.
Yes, thank you.
Perfect, thank you. Next time you're out in the Calgary area, it's a place to put on your destination for sights to see. We have time for one last question. I think Sue Monahan. Sue, you had a question for Tim. If you want to unmute yourself, and that'll be our last question for today. So are you able to unmute yourself, Sue? If we can't hear you, so if you go over.
There you go. There you go, right?
Yep, now we can hear you.
I just thought I would update you on today. My son-in-law works at the airport in air cargo. Yesterday I asked, so what's up? He said he got these ton units of toilet paper from Germany. Believe that. Some company, Procter & Gamble in Germany, sent these huge, they had to be carried on a truck in the airline. and they are going to the United States. He said that unbelievable. You could be killed by these things. So I guess somewhere in the United States, they get cut up into toilet paper. I thought, honest to God, where did they get the wood? Maybe it started in Canada and ended up in Germany. It's just unbelievable how planes and trains and automobiles have changed.
It is. Well, that's another story that I could come back and do sometime. Is the one I have done at the centre. Is my experiences in air cargo, and I can assure you would be staggered, amazed at the things that move by air freight.
Yeah, it is.
One that you might like to think about is horse meat.
Oh.
Masses and masses of horse meat.
Oh,
export from Canada. It's one of our biggest export commodities is horse meat.
Wow. Well, we definitely will have to have you come back, Tim. On behalf of everyone and Senior Services, I want to thank you for coming and being our first guest for our first virtual coffee talk today. Well done. Round of applause for Tim. Thank you very much. Thank you. And hopefully we will be able to have you back again as another guest. I think everyone thoroughly enjoyed the presentation. It was very interesting. I loved it myself as well. Look at that. You're getting a 2 thumbs up from John.
Thank
That's
you.
great. So thank you so much for that. And I just want to mention to everyone, we do have another Zoom coffee talk happening in March, and it'll be March 30th. We have a guest, we'll be doing, it's called a Toad Talk. It's a community outreach program that was started by the Canadian here we go.
Sorry, Nicole, can I just interrupt? You said March, but it's February.
Oh,
February 23rd.
You're right. February 23rd is the next one. And that's the Canadian Herpetological Society. It's a mouthful. I've never even said that word before. And they're going to be focusing on the freshwater turtles of Georgian Bay. So that's February 23rd, Zoom. It's free, 1:30. And in March 30th, Tuesday, 1:30, we have a guest from the Bank of Canada who will be telling us the story about the Viola Desmond $10 note, which was the first female to be placed, other than royalty, to be placed on a circulating Canadian note. So that will also be interesting. But the bar has been raised very high, Tim. You've really set a standard today.
So, Nicole, can I just mention for all of our Niagara Falls peeps, please know that Hanya will be sending you the poster for February and March. And then that way you'll have all the details, times, etc. And for our peeps, it's the exact, and for everybody, it's the exact same link. So if you keep this link in your favorites, you'll be able to just join any of our future Zoom programs.
The free ones. And I'll just mention, if you do want to let us know that you're planning on participating in the Zoom event, you can always send us an email or have questions. Send us an email at scww@oakville.ca. That's the website we use for our virtual and our telephone programming. If you send an email there, if you do have questions, we will respond, and we'll also make a note to expect you on the next virtual presentation. So Julie, do you have anything else to add before we go?
Yeah, just that I know there was some confusion this time because it was our first time registering for a special event for our Oakville peeps through the oakville.ca website. A lot of you found that challenging. So we're going to simplify it for you. You don't have to register there, but you can. If you want to just send an email, like Nicole said, to scww@oakville.ca. We'll add your name to the upcoming programs. Just indicate if you want the toads, turtles, or the Viola Desmond, and then we'll just send you back the link, okay? And then that way you'll have it, trying to simplify it and make it easier for you.
Okay. Well, I want to thank everyone as well as our speaker for joining us today. And the really nice thing is that you didn't have to leave your house, even though it's like windy and snowy out there. Because if we'd had this event at the center, we would have received about 50 phone calls from people asking if it had been canceled or if it was still going on. And we'd be having to try to make a decision whether or not to go ahead with it. So this was actually really a nice way to do the event on a snowy, windy day. So I hope everybody has a wonderful week. Thank you again for joining us. And again, feel free to reach out to any of us, to Julie or myself, if you do have any more questions about any of the programs that we are currently offering during the shutdowns. So that's it. And thanks again for joining, everyone. Have a great week.
Everyone,
Bye.
thank you.
Bye. Thank you, Tim. Well done. Yay. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Right.